My first guest is another member of the DIY Start Something from Nothing camp. He has a background in every aspect of professional wrestling on the independent circuit. He started his own wrestling promotion in 2018 called Without a Cause. Please welcome to the Eclectic Arts virtual studio, Mr. Max Zaleski. Max.
Hey, Mark. Thank you so much for having me and allowing me a platform to chit-chat about wrestling for a little bit.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad that you're here. I definitely have a background in being a fan of wrestling. I've never been in the ring, but I've definitely been on the outside of the ring watching and being entertained. So the fact that you're here is going to be really awesome. I think it's going to shed a lot of really interesting light on the sport and the entertainment of wrestling that maybe people have certain preconceived notions, and you're probably going to be able to give them the real skinny on really what happens. So I'm really glad that you're taking the time to be here, and you're my first guest. So you're setting the bar, sir.
Well, first the worst, second the best, and you save the best for last. So I hope that at the end of these, it'll truly be an incredible experience. But we're gonna trudge up some stuff, so don't worry about
it. Sounds good. So like I was doing this with the guests on the last tour, and with these interim shows, I've always been talking, or at least a little bit, sometimes a lot, depending on how things are going. How are you doing during this time of the pandemic and the protests? Not one personally, but also professionally, and with your wrestling promotion. So here we are on this Thursday, on the 25th of June. How are you holding up right now?
So we've had no shows now for almost 4 months. Our last show was February 23rd, and it was quite the experience, knowing that starting in March we had to start canceling shows, refunding tickets, all that good stuff. We don't run like we don't have like a day-to-day function or like any paid employees. I'm the sole employee because I'm the sole owner, and everybody else gets paid out piecemeal. So for that, it's been super easy. We're not losing a whole bunch of money for canceling March and April and May and June and whatever we had. So that portion has not been super difficult financially, but being able to like keep yourself in the world of wrestling, especially when there's no shows going on, is incredibly difficult. So we started up a couple of really cool things that we're doing on Twitch, this very platform, to kind of keep ourselves in the public eye, and also to raise money for our venue, which is the VFW Post 2100, that is down in Everett, Washington.
Okay, so it sounds like, all things considered, you're doing fairly well. We're going to kind of talk about your promotion and how it started and everything else like that. And you kind of already mentioned that you made one pivot during this pandemic, which was you're doing things on Twitch where you have viewing parties and can view the previous shows that you've done. I'm just kind of curious, just as a fan, as you've done those, have you watched your own shows and thought, well, here's something I don't like, or here's something we could have done better? Or are you self-critical like that?
Every single show I see something that I want to change and that I want to fix, and like, oh no, that didn't go the way that it should have, or hey, this match went a little bit long, or those kind of things. But it's all in good fun, and the crowd, we get about 30 to 50 to 60 sometimes, and then the people watching live. But we also get pretty good numbers on the watch back, because not only are we watching along, we also have wrestlers and our office team join in and talk about the shows. So it's like a little behind the scenes, a little bit of Q&A, and just something to kind of like, whet people's appetite for knowing a little bit more about the craft that they love.
Got it. No, that sounds fun, and in some ways it kind of sounds similar to what we're doing with these interim shows right now with Alice, of doing something with maybe some commentary, or some other aspect of the band is going to be talking about their instruments, or things that fans don't really get a chance to hear and know about, and now they will with this platform. So no, it sounds awesome. Let's kind of go all the way back. We were talking pre-show that you're a native Washingtonian, just like I am. And so if you could let the folks out there that are viewing this right now, what was the young Max like? What were you going through when you were a kid? And when did wrestling first enter your life, sir?
So born and raised in Washington State, born in Everett, lived in Everett for most of my life. Bounced around a couple of times, mainly in Seattle, and then a brief stint in Leavenworth, Washington, which is a beautiful little Bavarian town right as you cross the mountains. I was a I started as a wrestling fan when I was like 8 or 9, and I got in trouble from wrestling because there's a wrestler named Rikishi who is a bigger gentleman, and he had a move where he would stick his butt in people's face and would rub it all around. And my mom was not very thrilled about that, so I was actually like grounded from wrestling for a little bit. And by the time I was like 11 or 12, she figured I'm not going to be able to keep him from the stuff that he loves. So she actually surprised me with WrestleMania 19 tickets, which happened in Seattle. And that kind of re-kickstarted my love for wrestling. So it's been about 17 years.
Wow. Wow. When you were telling that story about Rikishi, I thought you were going to say that you did the stink face to someone else. And that's why you got grounded or what have you. But okay. That's interesting too that you mentioned WrestleMania 19 because I was there as well. So my wrestling background goes back to some people know, like you were saying, when you're 8 or 9, you had an interest in it. I wasn't one of those people. I don't even know if we had access to it back then. I'm pretty old, but it was more of that right around 2001, 2002. I got interested in the backstory in a big way, even though I'd known about wrestling and seen some of the main big wrestlers from Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant to at that time The Rock and Stone Cold and Kurt Angle, Mick Foley, all those people. But I still remember when, and of course, most people that don't even know wrestling remember that scene from Hell in the Cell when Undertaker threw Mick Foley off the cage down onto the announcer's table. I remember ESPN back then had nothing to do with WWF than WWE, but they showed that clip at the end of Sports Center. And I remember watching that thinking, because at that time I wasn't a fan of wrestling, but when you watched Mick go all the way off there and land on that table, I'm like, there's no way that's fake. There's just no way. You can't fake that. How the hell did they do that? And then I always had that in the back of my head. And then as I kind of saw that he wrote some books and got kind of interested in what The Rock was doing, I never probably would have gone to a live event at that time, but I was doing like a mentorship program. And the young man that I was paired up with, he loved wrestling, but had never seen the live event. So I saw WWE Raw was coming on the Monday night. I said, hey, I'm going to buy tickets. Let's go. I didn't know what to expect there. And it was like a freaking rock concert. It was like,
yeah, I was also at that Raw too.
Oh,
yeah.
It had such a huge impact on me because it was so fun, so entertaining. The fans were great because I was honestly a little concerned about what kind of fandom was going to be like. And it turned out it's like going to a comic book convention. But these people love wrestling. They're just wrestling nerds, basically.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and you had families, people of color, young, old. I mean, it was awesome. It was a great time.
Wide swath of fan base.
For sure, yeah. And so with your background going to WrestleMania 19, and you just mentioned you went to the same Raw that I went to, you have a background also in becoming a wrestler, correct?
Yeah. I trained to become a wrestler through the 3-2-1 Battle Academy. I started training in like mid 2017 ish, and by the time that April 2018 rolled around, I was ready to I had a character. I was ready to go. I actually wrestled in front of 500 people at the Showbox in Seattle, in front of a sold-out crowd at Battlemania 2018, but I was under a mask. I was one of the Battle Rangers, which is like a Power Rangers kind of character. And then just a month later, I debuted at a separate show as my actual wrestling persona named Baruda, which is Polish for wild man, because I'm very Polish. If you can't tell, very Polish. And so I drew upon that, and it was really fun for the 2 weeks leading up to everything. I blacked out all of my social media accounts. I did the social media work where I'm I posted fur and dead animals, and it was a really fun time to be me in May 2018, and then I debuted, and 20 minutes later I tore my ACL. So
Oh,
I decided not to get it fixed because I'm stubborn. My wife can definitely attest to that. I hate going to the doctor. I hate being a burden on people. So within a month, Without a Cause was like in my brain from that injury. So it was just a month or so after that we filed like LLC papers.
okay. Um, that's interesting. Let's kind of go back, especially for people out there that maybe don't know the ins and outs of any level of professional wrestling. When you're training to become a wrestler, what does that entail? Can you kind of speak to that, please?
Yeah, so I'm a little lazy. Shocking. Well, I'm lazy in different ways. I don't like doing a lot of stuff with my body. So physically, I'm very lazy,
Mm.
unfortunately. But what we entailed was I would regularly go to classes, which was held by different trainers. Actually, one of my trainers is one of my business partners, Chris Ross. He had a great deal of work put into me as a wrestler. So I trained with him. He would actually pick me up and drop me off because it was on his way to the gym. So it was, I feel like I had a little bit of a leg up on getting a friendship out of it also. But it's a lot of, it's a lot of bumps and bruises, especially those first couple months, because you want to like protect yourself when you're falling, but that's not how wrestling works. You got to learn how to fall correctly. Got to make sure you know how to run the ropes, which was always my I hated running the ropes, even though I was good at it. I hated it because it's cardio, and I'm a short fat guy, and even back then I was still a short fat guy, just a little bit less in the waistline. But yeah, it's hard. You don't really talk about character a whole bunch until you're like starting to get ready to debut somewhere. And the minute that you debut, that's when you can start taking bookings.
Okay. And I think also from the little bit I've seen or studied, when you're talking about hitting the ropes, seems like when you first start, you end up with like marks on your sides and
Welts.
everywhere on your
Yep.
that people think, oh, it must be like you just run against these three ropes and then you bounce off them. It's like, no, that's completely unforgiving to your body.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, also like taking a bump when you land smack on your flat on your back on the mat. Those mats don't look very forgiving either to me.
Oh, it's crazy. People think that there's like 3 inches of padding and like a spring, and like it's like gym mats that you're falling on. No, 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 no. It's boards covered by maybe a little thin padding, and then the canvas, and that's it. So you're falling on wood with a little bit of give.
Yeah, exactly. And so if people out there can kind of picture doing this, day in, day out as you're training, let alone everything else that you're learning to do if you're leapfrogging people and everything else. The biggest piece too that we haven't talked about yet, which hopefully you can speak to, is that you're really entrusting your life into your opponent's hands, because if one wrong move with a maneuver, and it might go south really, really quick on you. Can you kind of speak to the hazards of being a wrestler, other than your ACL, obviously, tearing, but just in general?
Yeah, wrestling is just like any other combat sport, except or any kind of contact sport. It's a different animal. You go in there full well knowing that you could walk out with a torn ACL or a broken ankle or whatnot. And it's always the stupidest things that get you hurt. I wasn't hurt in the ring. Like, I wasn't hurt doing a move or anything. I was coming off the apron, and I had to step out of the way from a referee, as not to make sure that the referee was smaller than I, maybe 110 pounds, so I didn't want to hurt him. So I shifted my weight in midair and came down on my leg, and it popped. Weirdest pain I've ever felt, because it didn't hurt like right away, and then I got to the back. Obviously, your adrenaline's going, and then I looked down, and my knee is like swollen. I'm like, oh, that's not good. And I'm like, I remember that sound. It's like the people can do that with their knuckles, where they go like this and it pops really loud. Is the exact same sound. But it's just one of those things that you know going in, and obviously you talk to your ring partner for the night, or your partners for that night. You know what you cannot do, what you're willing to do. And it's really like 100% consensual relationship from bell to bell.
Okay. Yeah, and I remember trying to describe when I was really getting into wrestling to someone else who didn't understand why I was getting into wrestling, that it reminded me very much of taking sports and mixing it with like a play, because when you're an actor, you've got to work with all of your actors. It doesn't matter if you're playing the bad guy, you're the good guy, you're the whatever. You all have a common goal, and you have to make sure that everyone's safe. That you, if someone's starting to have an issue, that you will work around that issue, and that happens right split second, right actually in the ring. Is my understanding that someone may have twisted their ankle, but they still want to finish the match. Okay, we need to finish and change the outcome, or do some other spots instead.
Yep. Yeah, that's the training after I tore my ACL, because I didn't know that I had torn my ACL until about a month later, because my doctor wanted me to go through PT, like physical therapy first, before getting an X-ray done because of insurance reasons. And I'm like, in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm pretty sure my ACL is torn. PT is not going to do anything. If anything, it's going to make it worse. But I went through it. But the first training that I went to afterwards, because I'm like, don't worry about it. I'll just bandage it up and it'll be fine. I tried to run the ropes, and I'm like, nope, like, I can't pivot. I can't do anything. I can walk and like load bearing, but I can't like twist it a whole bunch. And in sports, you need to be able to like pivot, and it's impossible to do. But just like that, we actually started working on what happens if somebody gets hurt in the match. Like, how do you work around it? So we worked on like feinting, or like feigning moves on the knee. So like making sure that you're falling the right way as not damage the knee, or like you're not actually making contact. So it was actually a very, very valuable training or two that I kept on going. And then after I figured out that I wasn't going to be a wrestler anymore, I'm like, well, I guess I'll stop going to training, even though I do wish that I would have kept on going just for fun.
Okay. And another aspect of the wrestling world that even people that again that aren't maybe fans of it necessarily probably understand is that you have baby faces and you have heels. Can you speak to what those differences are? And then with your character before you got injured, which one were you?
So a babyface is like a good guy. Like everybody knows, like Hulk Hogan in the 80s. He was the face of the company, and he was also, take your vitamins, say your prayers, eat your cereal, Hulkamania. And then like a bad guy would be like a Rowdy Roddy Piper, a heel, where and you always have to have a heel to get the best out of a babyface. A babyface match can work, but it's very hard to like make it make sense in story wise, unless it's just like a match. If it's just a match, then it's fine. But to build a story out of that, you need to be super creative. But like the heels will, spit and call the fans, all sorts of names, or the wrestler all sorts of names, whereas the baby face will, support the people and fight the power. Baruda, my character, we had started thinking about what we were going to do. I debuted and I saved someone, basically. So ultimately I'd come in as a baby face. Actually, it's I debuted and saved someone from the newest WAC team member, Jaden Morales, who is based down in Oregon. So full circle, I'm working with him again, just in a different capacity.
That's awesome. And it's also, I've talked about this on previous interviews, where sometimes you just never know where things are going to end up in terms of people that you meet, and the capacities that you're working with them in. And then here you are with someone that you had wrestled with, and now is part of your company and management. So that's
right.
awesome. Let's kind of also talk about that when you started Without a Cause, which I think is a really cool name, by the way. And you, because of the injury, you said it's already kind of spinning in your head that you're going to maybe start your own promotion. and making an LLC, obviously make everything legal. What did that entail? How did you get your business partners? How did you get your first show? I mean, there must have been a ton of work behind this.
So we had, myself and Chris Ross had already wanted to run like a show, mainly like a student showcase kind of deal, to really showcase like the students that 321 Battle had at the time. And our idea was it would be quarterly, or maybe like, every 6 months or something, because the best training is in front of a crowd. You can train and have training matches until the cows come home, but if you can't perform in front of a crowd, you're never going to know. So that's what our idea was. So we had gone to a couple of the management team over at 321 Battle. This was way back, like probably 2 or 3 months before I even debuted, and said, hey, we'd really like to do this thing. We got shot down for one reason or another. And by the time I had gotten hurt, I'm like, I guess I'll just run a show. And it was only going to be one show. It was supposed to be one show, and we would see where it kind of took us. And it kind of grew and blew up and everything, especially during that summer, because the summer of 2018, I was still working with 321 Battle as their social media director, coordinator, manager, whatever you want to call it. And so I was working with them in that official capacity, and then I'm like, okay, well, I'll make my own company, and probably sometime down the road I'll have to leave 321 because it looks weird to be part of two different companies in an official capacity. So we came to the realization that, well, if we're gonna do it all legally and go through the motions of making an LLC and getting the licenses and everything, it doesn't make any sense just to run one show. So by the time we had announced our first show, this was in August, and our first show was in October, we had already had 3 shows planned out. We knew exactly the dates and what we were going to do. We had our one of our other business partners, he has a ring, so he was providing us with that ring. And then it was just kind of reaching out to people and seeing, hey, do you want to come in and do what you do in front of a new crowd, especially because it's Everett. Something kind of peeking behind the curtain on that is I graduated from Everett High School, and love Everett High School. It's love it. It's so close to home for me. I had reached out to them about using their gym, because they have chairs and everything and a good PA system all set up and everything, and they were like, we don't want anything to do with professional wrestling. I'm like, that's weird. And then in my brain, I'm like, they think that we're going to have a whole bunch of rowdy drunk adults like throwing chairs in the ring, or there's going to be blood all over the place, because that's what wrestling was in like the mid to late 90s. And that's what was like super popular when a lot of these people who were making the decisions were growing up. So they're like, we don't want that. So I think that's kind of why we got shunned out of my alma mater.
Well, see, and that's kind of like what we talked about earlier, that people have preconceived notions about wrestling and wrestlers, and depending on what they saw on the news or on nowadays with social media, and that there's different types of wrestling, there's different types of shows, like you're talking about hardcore matches versus maybe something that's more like a lucha libre thing, or something that's just an American style match that's more family friendly. So it's maybe like PG-13-ish, depending.
Yeah.
And even like the ones that I've gone to that are family oriented, you might hear the word ass, maybe ass with the other part attached to it, but you don't hear the S word, you don't hear the F word. At least I didn't. But then there's other shows where you definitely hear those kind of things, and those fans usually know it, and they love it. They actually want to be a part of that. Yeah, and let's kind of speak to that whole interaction, because this goes with concerts, theater, doesn't matter, any kind of live event. Wrestling's no different. That what's it like when you wrestle, and you obviously as a promoter, when you have a hot crowd and when you have what I consider a cold crowd, because it makes a huge difference to everybody involved.
Yeah. So Wrestling is still fairly new to the fan base out here in Washington. Wrestling didn't really exist out here until about 2015, 2014, 2015. And that's just because the commission had a lot of different laws and regulations that they put in. And then once 2015, 2016 rolled around, those regulations were kind of pulled back a little bit and allowed more people to join the, to get in the pool, basically. Um, so conditioning fans to interact and engage with the wrestling, like that takes a couple of shows. The crowd doesn't like immediately know whether it's they're a face or a heel, or what like the story is going to be, because the idea is to build and build and build, and then you have a blow off, and then those people go into different stories. So until those blow-offs, and until you can like really showcase that and you're clever enough to build a good story, it's really hard to like grasp an audience. And I would say probably about January, February, so roughly 3 or 4 shows in, we knew we had something special. And it never slowed down. It actually picked up a lot of steam right around June or July last year, because from June to July, we actually moved our venue to the VFW. We used to run out of a place called the Normanna Lodge, which is actually right next door to the building that we're in now. And it had a low ceiling, and the PA system like worked like 80% of the time. So we were like trying to figure out what we could do, and we just figured, what if the venue is like the problem, because we were getting a lot of good like word of mouth and everything, but it wasn't until we got to the VFW, which is actually they have a neon light on their ceiling, and it's the largest indoor neon light outside of like Vegas and Atlantic City. And it's also the only one of its kind, like that specific logo. And it's one of the armed forces like insignia. But so what we did is we made this logo and we put it up into like the neon lights for our logo, and that's where our newer logo, because if this is going to be our home, we wanted to build something out of that, and it was very important for us to do that. And the minute that we moved into the VFW, things kept on going, but it was exponential. Like, we were selling out of seats within 20 to 30 minutes rather than a day. So it was really, really quick. And our momentum was going and going and going up until March, when we had to start canceling shows.
That's unfortunate. Well, I mean, as we know, for everyone during this time, and bands like Alice and theater and ballet and everything else that I cover, all went out the window. And it's like, well, now what? And it's been such a huge question mark, because even now to this day, I just got a press release about that one theater company's closing down for the entire year. And I thought, okay, they're from September, they start in September, they end in June. So why are they saying this now? And then it clicked with me. No, they're saying the rest of 2020, they're done, because they can't financially keep things going. They'll look at it again in 2021. And that's when it kind of hit me that we're still in this mess. And it's going to be months, if not years, to us to kind of figure out what this quote unquote new normal looks like, including for wrestling. Mm-hmm. So this might be a good time.
We don't have any we don't have an end in sight, obviously, during this pandemic. It's kind of like making us reevaluate like what we want to do when we come back. These watch alongs, like, we're going to keep on doing them after we're back doing live shows, because it's fun, but it's also kind of clever on the business side, because we're using our content twice or 3 times or 4 times or whatever. Mm-hmm. So it's it's a little bit of savvy marketing a little bit. But what really I didn't grow up with someone who liked wrestling and everything. Like, my mom tolerated it as much as she could, and my dad didn't care. So we have a lot of kids who come with their parents or their dad or their mom or whatever, and they get into it more than the adults do. We have this kid named Owen, who makes his own shirts. He's probably, I think he's 9. He makes his own shirts, and sometimes if like a wrestler flips off the crowd, he'll flip him off right back. And the dad like the dad side eyes him and then joins in with him. It's hilarious, and that's the kind of stuff that wrestling is so important to a lot of people because that's what they grew up with. And if I could provide that for people that from all ages, like that's what I want to do. I want to build a community, which is so incredibly important to me, to keep that community safe and have continue the rich the rich history of the Pacific Northwest wrestling scene, and also build one for Washington State itself.
Oh, very well said. And yeah, more power to you. I mean, one of the reasons that I've been following you through social media, and again, we talked about this pre-show, that I love how you are very interactive, but you're also very, very transparent with your company and what you will tolerate and which you will not tolerate. Mm-hmm. And you've been from the get-go, you've been really, really transparent. So I've been kind of that fly on the wall, kind of watching this guy, seeing how he's doing his business. And I loved everything that you're doing, which is one of the reasons why I reached out to you. And again, connecting yourself to Alice, they're amazing people. I don't care if you love the band, don't like the music, whatever. You're crazy if you don't love the music. But if you're that person, you can't not like them as people. And that's one of the best things about doing all this kind of thing and connecting, bringing people together. I mentioned once during the tour that's kind of like a ice cream social or something where you just got all these people together that do have a commonality in terms of how they think and how they go about the business. And let's kind of talk about that really topically. That recently, I think it was maybe a week ago, you put out a code of conduct for your company. And was that something that you just felt you wanted to establish and just throw it out there and say, this is where we stand and we're not going to deviate? Or can you speak to that, please?
So we've been very lucky with Without a Cause events. We've only had 2 like minor issues at our events in terms of like things that probably shouldn't have been said or done. Our very first show, we had someone in the crowd call one of our women wrestlers, a bad name, and not in character, not and he kept on repeating it. So we asked him to leave, and he left, and he's never been back to a show. And I feel that was like kind of like the kickoff of like, oh man, Without a Cause isn't like screwing around with that stuff. And then just recently in February, we had a group of fans, a couple of fans that had a little bit much to drink and were a little bit obnoxious and started yelling and stuff. So after the show, I reached out to them. I'm like, hey, that can't happen again, or you're not allowed at the shows anymore. But specifically, this code of conduct came about because in the last week or so, and it's not just wrestling that's going through it, gaming in terms of like Twitch and YouTube, as well as the tabletop gaming community and comic book space, are having a lot of men, women, and gender fluid or non-binary speak out about their experiences at events, or people within the industry not being as savory as they should, especially in terms of like younger children or younger fans, where the power dynamic is very much the inherent power dynamic there is you're like a god to them in some case, and any attention is that whole thing is just very gross, and we felt that it was very important for us. This had already been kind of like a thing like in our management, where we don't really, we have a zero drama, zero tolerance policy for drama and like bullcrap. We don't take it. So we just wanted to kind of put it out in words, and we're very transparent with it. Including we're going to be working with our IWTV distribution to have a pre-roll on any of our events that may have had somebody who have legitimate experiences, or legitimate allegations and instances. We're going to have a pre-roll stating that it would be WWE did it for like Chris Benoit after he had killed his family and everything. So we're doing it for any of matches that have these wrestlers or people involved that have been outed as unsavory and problematic. So I think that's going to be super helpful. But we came to the fans first. We're like, what do you want to see? Because we can scrub, we can remove everybody, but just know that the people that are in the matches that aren't problematic, that is also a negative to them. So thankfully, we think that we're going to do the pre-roll thing, and it's going to be fine. We don't have a date on that. Obviously, this is still going on. So and it just started happening like last Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for your transparency. I think it's something that's important. You easily could have taken the other road, which is not to be transparent and just brush it aside and like just ignore it basically. But instead, you're dealing with it head on and being transparent with your fans and the public. And I think that's exactly the way to go with it. And as we talked pre-show, there's so many positive things that come from wrestling and come from the wrestlers and those events. And you have a few of these instances, and it's not just with wrestling, it's in the music scene, like you were saying, it's in the gaming scene and everything else that sometimes they just kind of come to the surface, and either you deal with it or you don't, and you're choosing to deal with it, which I think is really commendable.
Yeah, and that's something that we really pride ourselves on is being genuine. I'm one of the most open people that you'll ever meet, positive, even in like these times right now. Like I could have, I wouldn't have, but I could have reached out to you and say, hey man, there's just too much stuff going on. It's kind of a rough time. But we're incredibly genuine people, and we're dealing with it in the right way, we feel. And the response from our fans and people who have supported us since day one have been also positive to how we handle these issues. So just being me is the only thing that I can be, and I'm the face of the company, like in terms of management and in terms of like ownership. So if I can't be genuine, then the company can't be genuine. So that's kind of where that lies.
Yeah, no, again, very well said, and it's also very appreciated that that's the tactic that you're taking. I think again, if you ask myself, if you ask the members of Alice, we're very transparent about what we do and how we do it, and that's kind of how you build those positive relationships, and that's how you move forward and find the right people. We keep talking about finding your tribe, and those people can be in different walks of life, but they might have that commonality, and as long as you find them, then you're looking pretty good. So we've got about we got about 3 minutes left. This is crazy that this first inaugural 45-minute interview is actually almost over. I want to shift gears a little bit. I know you can't speak to things in detail, but I know for your day job, you have something that really a lot of people would, I think, be super impressed by. I know I was when I heard about it. What can you tell us about what you do in terms of dogs?
So the most that I can say is that I do work on behalf of Amazon. I work in the Amazon campus in Seattle, and I am the assistant program manager for their Dogs at Work program, which is the program that oversees the ability and the benefit to bringing dogs into the workspace. And that is something that Amazon really prides itself on. So it's very nice, and I feel very grateful to be able to be a part of something so integral to their culture. And I've worked with them. I've worked for this company. Heinz does a lot of work on behalf of Amazon. So been very lucky to get. I'm at 2.5 years. I'm almost at 3 years right now. And I absolutely love it, and it's challenging every day, but it's a good challenge.
Awesome. And just off the top of my head, do you have a dog of your own?
We don't. My wife is incredibly allergic to everything,
Oh,
like everything, animal wise. So it's really tough to be like, hey, you should just take like uh anti-allergy meds all the time, like forever until we're done. But yeah, we hopefully later.
okay. Well, and then you get enough probably dog contact from your day
Oh
job.
man,
Then
so much. I get my doggy time there. So
awesome. Well, Max, it was a pleasure getting a chance to finally talk with you and learn about Without a Cause. We've got about a minute left. Is there anything you'd like to say, plug? This is your chance.
Yeah, so you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. It's Without a Cause WA. The WA obviously stands for Washington. So it's Without a Cause WA, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can follow me everywhere at Max Wrestling WA. Once again, the WA stands for Washington, born and raised. And I'm everywhere: Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Awesome, sir. Thank you so much again. Stay safe up there in Everett, and hopefully once we're past all this, I'll get a chance to come watch a WAC show.
Yes, thank you so much, Mark, and it'll be a pleasure to have you.
All right. Take care.
Yep. See ya.